Hi, I'm Penny Perez, and today we'll be learning about a soft skill that will help you thrive at work and maybe your personal relationships. Welcome to Improving Your Speaking Skills with PVLEGS. So, we live in a world where communicating and speaking well is mandatory. Think about the last few years. We've all been on Zoom or Google Meets. We've been listening to podcasts more and more. We've been FaceTiming with our friends and our family. We've been attending webinars and using Skype. Really, the list is endless. Even if we're not standing in front of people, the fear of speaking can still be just as strong and very real. Luckily, with some practice, there is a framework to help. So this idea of PVLEGS was created by Eric Palmer. He's an author and speaker and a consultant on improving oral communication. He created this system for people just like you. Just know the very first thing, you are not alone. The fear of speaking is a common one, but it can be overcome with some practice. The first letter in PVLEGS is P, which stands for poise. And you know a confident speaker before they ever open their mouth. Think of Amanda Gorman at the inauguration. She walked up to the podium, and before she said anything, you can tell she appeared calm and confident. And that's really what poise is all about, is appearing as calm and as confident as you can. I know if you're a nervous speaker, that can be very difficult. But really, practice makes perfect. So another part of poise is avoiding distracting behaviors. If you know you're one of those people who has to click a pen or snaps when they're nervous, it's important to maybe find a behavior that will help soothe you that isn't as distracting. So you've been in an audience, I'm sure, where someone begins speaking and you can barely hear them. What do? That person is not using their voice correctly. There's a couple of different aspects to voice. It's about speaking every word clearly, but also using the right volume for the space. You can be loud in a small space and be just as annoying and grating as someone who is speaking too quietly in a large space where everyone's straining to hear. Also, voice ask you not to mumble or blur your words. It's easy when you're nervous to just try to rush through and get through everything you have to say, but really voice is about thinking clearly and saying every word precisely. Also, know your audience. Don't use jargon unless you know that every person in the room knows it. So life is about creating excitement about what you are talking about. So imagine Charlie Brown's teacher being your teacher. Do you think that you would learn anything? It's a lot of a lot of monotone, right? So you want to express passion and emotion with your voice. You don't necessarily have to even be on camera like I am to show emotion with your voice. So show enthusiasm for things that are exciting, sadness for sad topics, and anger for upsetting things. Monotone voices are really hard to track and understand as a listener. So even if you are not in front of people, even if you're not on camera, or even if people are not looking at you, it's still really important to inject life into your voice. So the next part of PVLEGS is eye contact. So in American culture, eye contact is a sign of respect and openness and understanding. But it's also one of the hardest things to do, right? There's this idea that if you get nervous when you're talking in front of people, you just look at the back of the room, the back wall, above everyone's head. And while that might be okay in large, huge audiences, really, the probability of you speaking in front of a large, huge audience is small. So you want to connect visually with the audience. You want to do your best to look at each audience member at least once if you're able to. And another thing with eye contact is notes, right? It's nice to have notes when you're giving a speech or you're talking about a really particular and precise topic. But if you do use notes, use them sparingly. only when absolutely necessary. Eye contact is very important, especially when you are trying to convince someone of something or trying to get someone on your side. You really want to make that eye contact. The G in PVLEGS is gestures. So you may be scared to move your body while speaking. After all, you're probably thinking, I already have to talk to these people. You mean I have to move around too? Yes, you're not a piece of wood. You can move around. Use hand motions. Move your body. Have an expressive face. If it feels really overwhelming to do that, maybe practice one hand motion while you're trying to explain things, like maybe you are giving hand gestures about how big something is or about how long something is. Or if you feel comfortable moving your body, maybe in your mind, in wherever you're standing, if you're standing in front of people, give yourself a box of where to move. You can move 2 steps forward, 2 steps to the left, to the right. Just give yourself a little space to work with and practice consciously moving. Maybe even have cues in your speech, if you're practicing your speech, of, okay, when I say this, I'm going to move 2 steps to the right. As long as you practice this, it will feel very natural, look very natural. But this does require practice. A thing about gestures, though, is if you use too many gestures, it can be very distracting. So, you know, those people who talk with their hands, and sometimes you're not even listening to what they're saying because you're just watching their hands move at a mile a minute. Be conscious of that. Gestures are good, but gestures can also be distracting. And lastly, speed. When we get nervous, we tend to speed up our speech. But going too slowly can be just as bad. So I want you to talk with an appropriate speed, not too fast, not too slow. Really, if you're trying to enunciate every word, you're going to find the right pace. Also, pauses are not nearly as long as they feel, I promise. Pauses can be used for effect and for emphasis. So if you drop a truth bomb on people, pause, let them think it through, let them process. If you're just moving from one topic to another without giving yourself or your audience a chance to process and interact, they may lose something that you've said. They may not remember what you said. So pauses are good, and they're not nearly as long as they feel. So where are some places that you can use PVLEGS? Well, obviously in the workplace, if you're giving a presentation, if you're in a meeting with your team, if you're in an evaluation with your boss, if you're doing the groundwork with your team of designing a project or working on a task. But this also can become very valuable in your personal relationships. Remember, all of these things can apply to one-on-one conversations, eye contact, gestures, enthusiasm, life. Remember that as you are using PVLEGS. So now that you've learned the basics, it's time to apply it in your own life. How can you use PVLEGS? Who will hold you accountable for trying? And then what do you think success will look like? What will make you feel like, yes, I did it? Something to think about. I look forward to your comments.